Hello, Sandwich. Ryan Janisch here, the Assistant Superintendent for the Sandwich School District. Very happy to be joining everyone tonight to go over Imagination According to Humphrey. I get to bring us home Chapter 10 as we finish up One School, One Book here in the Sandwich Learning Community. I know I've enjoyed doing One School, One Book with my kids for years and happy to participate today as a guest reader. So Chapter 10, Special Guest, here we go. Og. Joey's story is great. Rosie helped him a lot, and I helped a little too, I squeaked to my neighbor when I returned on Monday morning. Boing, Og twanged with excitement. The rest of the week was busy, 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 as my friends finished writing and illustrating their stories. They worked on special paper and made them into little books. At night, I finished my story. I tried to add lots of zing. I was pleased when I could write the end. When is our special surprise? Cassie asked one day. Is it a person, place, or a thing? And what are we supposed to do? Calm down, Cassie, Mrs. Brisbane said. The surprise is on Friday, and all you have to do is show up. Cassie looked calmer after she said that. Once the books were finished on Thursday, Mrs. Brisbane placed them on a table where Og's tank and my cage sat. Wow, they looked unsqueakable wonderfully. They had illustrations, fantastic covers, and everything. I guess my story was a little plain, but at least I'd finished it. Later that night when Aldo came in to clean, he saw the finished books. What's this? He asked. Your class wrote books? Yes, I squeaked. Do you like them? Aldo began thumbing through the books. These are really good, he said. Leave it to Mrs. Brisbane to teach her students to write so well. Aldo looked through a few more. When I get to be a teacher, I want my students to write like this, he said. Then he looked right at me. And Humphrey, I'm going to be a teacher before long. A very good teacher, I hope. I know you will, I squeaked. Aldo is so good at sweeping and dusting and going to school and being a friend. I'm sure he'll be a great, great, great teacher, too. Later, when he dusted Mrs. Brisbane's desk, he said, well, what do you know? He was looking at a piece of paper. I'd like to be here for this, he said. I don't have a class then. I'll ask Mrs. Brisbane if I can come too. Come to what? I squeaked, but he didn't answer. I'm happy that Aldo was coming to our class. I wasn't happy that I didn't know what the surprise was. Once Aldo was gone, I had two things on my mind. Getting a good look at all of the books and finding out what that note said. I jiggled the lock that doesn't lock and opened the door. Then I strolled along the long table looking at each book lined up there. "Ooh," I exclaimed when I saw Sophia's book. The parrots looked colorful, but their sharp beaks looked a little frightening. Eek, I said as I looked at small Paul's book. His travel time machine was awe-inspiring. An adventure he wrote about it was exciting and even a little bit scary. Kelsey's book was all pink and purple, and she did a wonderful job of describing a ballet. And to think that Be Careful Kelsey once thought she was clumsy. Simon's book about Italy made me a little bit hungry. Luckily, I had some celery stored in my cheek pouch. When I got to Joey's book, all I could say was, wow. His descriptions of the animals in Africa were fantastic, but his drawings were like something out of a library book. Yet, I knew they'd come out of his own brain. Og, Joey is very talented, I squeaked. Boing, Og agreed, before making a spectacular leap into the water. My friend had done something wonderful. They'd all become writers. It was a lot of work, but their books were beautiful. All that reading made me tired, and I knew it would be a lot of work to climb up Miss Brisbane's desk. So I decided not to go. It would be more fun to find out about the surprise at the same time my classmates did. When I returned to my cage, I took the little notebook out from behind my mirror. I knew my story wasn't as great as the ones my classmates had written, and I knew none of my friends would ever even know I wrote a story. But when I read about the Flying Hamsters Airlines, I could picture myself flying all my friends to the places they love most. And I felt a special feeling that I think they call joy. The next day, everyone in room 26 was jittery and excited because they knew we were going to have a special surprise. I didn't want the surprise to be the return of Pearl. I didn't want the surprise to be something terrible, such as Mrs. Brisbane leaving. I did want the surprise to be something wonderful, and it was. After morning recess, strange things started to happen. First, Mr. Morales came into room 26. He doesn't come here too often because he has so much to do as the principal of the school. Next, my dear friend Mrs. Mack entered the room with her entire first grade class. The biggest surprise was that she brought Gigi with her. I think it's time for Humphrey and Og to meet our class guinea pig, she said, and she set Gigi between Og's tank and my cage. Of course, Gigi and I had already met, but Miss Mac didn't know that. Gigi, meet Og, I said. Og, meet Gigi. Boing, boing, boing. Og hopped around his tank. Nice to meet you, Gigi squealed. I knew you two would like each other, I squeaked happily. Once the students in room 12 were seated, Mr. Morales came to the front of the room. Boys and girls, I know you've been working very hard on your writing, he said, and you've done a very good job. So, we have a special guest today. I turned to the back of the room where a tall woman with red hair was standing next to Mrs. Brisbane. And surprised, Aldo was there too. Mr. Morales continued, I want you to make her feel comfortable and listen and treat her with respect. Here she is, the author, Cameron Cole. As the tall woman walked to the front of the room, my classmates all applauded. They looked as excited and amazed as I was. First of all, I thought Cameron Cole was a man. Second of all, I never thought I'd meet the author of the Dragon book in person. Once the clapping and cheering stopped, Miss Cole began answering students' questions. I climbed up to the tip top of my cage so I could have a good view. I like to write stories because I like to use my imagination, she said. Does anyone here like to do that? Every hand, plus my paw, went up. She pulled a bright blue notebook out of her bag. It's important to keep a notebook, she said. I take my notebook everywhere. Miss Brisbane asked our class to hold up their notebooks. I was tempted to pull mine out of its hiding place, but in the end I left it there. Cameron Cole continued answering questions about dragons. Yes, she had seen a bearded dragon. No, she had never seen a huge fire-breathing dragon like Goldie, and she wasn't sure whether or not they were real. Yes, she loved fairy tales and dragon books when she was growing up. Then she answered questions about writing. Holly asked her where she got her ideas. That's what I want to know too. Mrs. Cole said, I find them absolutely everywhere. Things that happen to me, things that happen to people I know, things I read in the newspaper and books, conversations I overhear. You need to be open to ideas and you'll find them. She paused and glanced over at our table and smiled. I have to admit, I have an imaginary dragon friend when I was little, she said. I'm very grateful to him for inspiring me, and I used to lie on the grass and look up at the clouds, imagining that they were secret kingdom with a great big castle up there. That was the beginning of the Gil Goodfriend story. Imaginary dragon? That's a lot like an imaginary bear named Bear. Maybe Carlos will write a book about his friend one day. Who knows, she said, walking over to get a closer look at Gigi, Og, and me. Someday I might even write a book about these adorable animals. Really? I squeaked. I write about us all the time. Cameron Cole laughed. This hamster seems to have a lot to say. I do, I replied. I couldn't hardly believe I was talking to a real author. Boing, Og added. Oh, the frog has ideas too, Miss Cole chuckled. Say something, Gigi, I told my guinea pig friend, but Gigi was too shy to squeak. Mrs. Brisbane said that you started with a sentence and then a paragraph and ended with a story. Cameron Cole said that's exactly what I do when I write a book, so congratulations. Then our teacher announced that it was almost time for lunch. My friends groaned. I think they would have gladly given up their lunch to talk with Cameron Cole longer. She signed our dragon book and my friends' notebooks. I wish I could have had her sign my notebook too. The time had passed so quickly. My friends left for lunch, and Miss Brisbane and Miss Mack took Cameron Cole to the teacher's lounge for lunch as well. Aldo stayed behind to talk to us. Well, my friends, I don't usually see you during the day, he said, but I learned the author was coming, and one of the subjects I'll have to teach is writing. She gave me lots of ideas. Me too, Aldo, I squeaked. I have to start my student teaching soon. That's where you practice becoming a teacher in a classroom, he said, so wish me luck. Good luck, I shouted. Boing, boing, Og twanged, and Gigi even managed a soft squeal. Luck. After Aldo cleaned that night, I took out my little notebook and I read my story by the light of the street lamp outside the window. I was nervous about reading it. What if I didn't like it? What if I had to start all over again? Luckily, the story sounded pretty good to me. So I opened my lock that doesn't lock, hurried over to Og's tank. Would you like to hear my story? I asked. Boing, boing. Og definitely sounded interested. And so I began to read it. I'll never forget the day I became the first hamster airline pilot ever. I started my own company called Flying Hamster Airline so I could fly my human friends anywhere they wanted to go. First, I took Do It Now Daniel to his home of his favorite author, D.D. Denby. I wish I could stay to get some writing tips, but it was time to take Felipe to the theme park. Then I flew my friend Hopeful Holly to Phoebe's house. Holly hoped so many people. I was happy to help her too. Next, my zippy plane took Joey to the town where his dad lives. He was glad to get to spend some extra time with his dad, but instead of staying in town, Joey and his dad decided to fly along with me. We whizzed over to Europe so Simon could eat Italian food. I even had a tiny bit of a real Italian pizza. Yum. Then we stopped in Paris to take Kelsey to the ballet. The dancers were so graceful they practically flew through the air, just like my plane. I would have to stay in Paris. I would have stayed in Paris, but I had to fly to Africa. First, I took Rosie to see the pyramids of Egypt. The Sphinx was larger than and fiercer than I had imagined. Then I took Joey and his dad to another part of Africa, where we saw large and colorful creatures. The trumpeting of the elephants and the roars of the lions were sounds I will never forget. The zebras looked like someone had taken a brush to paint them black and white. I loved the giraffes and their long necks. They were so tall, I could hardly see their heads. Next, I flew Sophie to the island of the parrots. It was a noisy place, but Sophie loved talking to the birds, and they loved her. I wish they could understand my squeaks the way she understands the parrots. I dropped Cassie off on a quiet beach where she could watch the waves breaking all day long. I saved the best part of my trip for last. I flew Miss Brisbane and her husband to Tokyo. When they surprised their son Jason, the look on Miss Brisbane's face made me happy, happy, happy. I have lots more plans for Flying Hamster Airlines. Who knows? Maybe someday I'll fly you to a special place too. Og was silent after I finished. Then he leaped up on his cage and said boing, boing, boing before diving into the water on the side of his tank. I think he really liked it. And I really liked reading it to him because stories are meant to be shared. I think maybe Gigi would like it too, I said, but she might be asleep by now. Og splashed loudly. It could be a bedtime story, I said. Clenching the notebook between my teeth, I slid down the table leg and headed towards room 12. Gigi wasn't sound asleep yet. When I asked her if she'd like to hear my story, she squealed with happiness. She squealed even more when I finished. How did you learn to read and write, she asked. I paid attention in class, I said. You should try it too. I will, Gigi said. Then I headed back to room 26. Something amazing happened. My imagination went to work, and I thought of a brand new idea. I couldn't wait to write it in my notebook, and that's the best feeling in the world. My writer's ramblings. When I begin my story, I felt a little fright, but now that I have finished, I really love to write. The end. Humphrey also left us some top 10 tips for writers. I'm going to share those with you now as well. These are really great tips if you're interested in being a writer. So 1, keep that writer's notebook and jot down your ideas, or you might forget them. You don't have to keep yours hidden like the way I do, but it's a good idea. Humphrey also shared, brainstorm your story ideas by writing down all your thoughts as fast as you can for 5 minutes. Don't stop to judge whether they're good or not. When you're finished, you might just have a few great ideas. But really all you need is 1. Write something you'd enjoy writing about. Number 3, once you have a story you like, brainstorm ideas for a setting and characters. Tip number 4, now that you can work on your story should have a definite beginning, middle, and end. That might not be as easy as it sounds, but you can do it. Tip number 5, start filling in the details about what is happening to your characters. Step number 6, add some zing to your writing by using dialogue and making sure your characters don't all sound the same. Number 7, the more you write, the better you'll get. It takes practice, practice, practice. So try to write on a regular basis. The more you read, the better you will write. So read a lot of different kinds of books too. Tip number 8, when you're writing a story, you should think about what other people will think of it, whether or not it will get published. You should only think about making it the best story possible for you. That's all that counts. Number 9, revise, revise, revise. Each time you go through the story, you'll have an opportunity to make it better. Cameron Cole said that professional writers revise a lot, and I believe her. And Humphrey's tip number 10, don't forget that writing is fun. Write something that makes you happy, something you'd like to read, something that tells a story that only you can. Then, my friend, you will realize that writing is really, really fun. All right, Sandwich, I really hope you enjoyed Imagination According to Humphrey. Thanks for letting me read alongside with you. Have a great night.